The Extermination of Yellow Donory by Robert E. Howard. Fate works in a manner unreasonable and paradoxical. Men are driven by desperation to plunge headlong into the depths they have spent their lives trying to avoid. There is on record the suicide of a man who, rather than fight a duel in which he had an even chance of surviving, chose the certain path and shot himself the night before. "All my life," wailed Joey Donory, "I've been a scringing, scrawling, whimpering, gutless yellow coward." He paused as if for a response, but none was forthcoming. The wind sighed mournfully and monotonously outside his shack. Except for this noise, there was silence, which is not surprising, for Joey was raving in his way, and he raved only in solitude. Never had he been known to express a deep emotion in public, or lift his voice with undue feeling. In the presence of strangers or unfriendly acquaintances, he maintained a dumb and prayerful silence. Even among his few friends, he was not garrulous. And the reason thereof cut him to the marrow. Even now, he raised voice and spoke bitterly on the subject. "Yeah, I ain't even got the guts to talk back at 'em. They kick me around and make wisecracks and razz me till the world turns blue, and never a comeback I got. And it gets worse the older I get, 'cause a grown man ain't supposed to take things like a kid does. What a break I get." Maudlin tears gathered in his bleared and reddened eyes as he reached uncertainly for the ominously dark bottle which stood at his elbow. This he shook anxiously, showing some slight relief when a sensuous and throaty gurgle came from within. The relief was brief, however. He drank long and sadly, then began his rambling monologue again, which monologue was becoming rather incoherent. Joey Donory was not an imposing man. He was young, but he did not look it, nor did his manner suggest it. He was short and wiry, with a slight stoop, a long neck, and a sun-wrinkled, melancholy face set off by long, drooping whiskers. Those whiskers were his solitary pride. All else was bitterness. Born and bred in an environment where most men were large and imposing, his lack of size was bad enough, but his handicaps were more than physical. And it ain't so much me being that away. Most of the real bad hombres weren't so big. Look at Billy the Kid, no bigger than what I be. 'Tain't tallness, and 'tain't beef. It's what you got in you, and I just ain't got it. Why not? How in thunder I know? Lacking the necessary heft for fist fighting. I ought to be a wildcat with knives and guns, but knives give me the creeps, and the feel of a gat upsets my belly. I should ought to stayed on the old man's ranch up on the Sourwater Range, where folks knowed me and where I could have kept out of their way. And look at me, too." His voice rose, embittered, for just as many lonely men do, Joey was in the habit of talking aloud to himself. "Look here at me, top hand and first-class miner, spite my size. How many of those big hams can make that brag? How many fellers running loose, cowpunch and miner too? Can I keep a job anywheres? Like hell I can. Some big ham starts bully-ragging me till I up and clear, or else I lose my nerve so bad and fall down on the work so bad I get the old can. Me, what ought to be drawing as good wages as any man in the Copper Basin country. And now what am I going to do? Broke. No way of getting any money. Out of grub. That damn bull groker riding me till the world turns blue, and I can't even keep a job dishwashing, fearing he'll come in and poke me in the jaw just to be comic. Wish I had the guts to give him the works. If I was man, I'd shoot him so full of holes he'd look like an open windy. Today he slaps me on the back so hard I spill my liquor all over my shirt front, and then, ha ha, he laughs, ha ha ha, the big ham." Again, the bottle for which Joey had spent his last dollar was tilted upward, and Joey's mumbling profanity and self-pity merged with sounds indicative of liquid refreshments. The bottle bumped on the table. Joey, prone though he was to exaggerate his troubles, a failing characteristic of those whose life had been over rough, was really in desperate circumstances. He was, as he had said, broke. And though there was plenty of jobs for such as he, a barrier stood in the way. Any job he took would entail coming into contact with large, rough, and ready men. He shuddered and became nauseated. Physical fear was more than a fault of his. It was a black incubus, a monstrous cancer, born in him and nurtured by fear and a realization and contempt of himself. And it was growing with the years. He knew unreasoning fear of arrogant men and bullies, and always among any gang of men there's a bully. Maybe a nasty-minded tyrant, maybe a blatant jackass who's at heart good-natured, but a bully just the same. From job to job, Joey flitted until he was broken, a mass of quivering nerves, about ready for the psychiatric ward. Never in all my full life have I did one blamed thing which could possibly be called courageous. All my life, when I was a kid, I didn't mind. Never kept no job over 4 months. They started riding me. I started riding for new ranges. Good thing I learned to be in top hand on my old man's ranch before I started drifting. Mining, that comes natural. I picked her up easy, working in short snatches. If I'd had education, I'd have been a mining engineer. Used to, when I'd quit a job, I'd not worry. Go get another. Stomach's turning on that. Lost what little nerve I ever did have. Joey laid his head on his arms and wept. What seems trivial to others is the pure essence of hell to the sufferer, and the incubus of realized cowardice is the worst that haunts manhood. From that orgy of weakness and tears, Joey Donory rose with an iron resolve, crystallizing in his liquor-muddled brain. He had reached the state in which even the most trivial discomforts loom monstrously and with deathly portent, and Joey's troubles were not trivial. Better to be dead than to be yellow, he muttered, a light, almost feral desperation growing in his weak, reddened eyes. If I thought it'd be better, but I've been thinking that for 25 years and it gets worse. Tomorrow I won't have the nerve. Got to decide tonight. Already decided. I'm going to kill my fool self. He paused and looked around with a sort of dreary triumph, aware that he had made a statement dramatic and fraught with dire portent. I won't kill myself, he repeated. Then they'll see. He felt suddenly invested with a deep, dark significance. Somberly, and with a brooding majesty slightly affected by a wobbling walk, he crossed the room and, after some uncertain fumbling, jerked open a drawer. A cold blue glitter of steel winked up at him. Joey Donory's soul shriveled within him. He covered his face with his hands and reeled away. "Oh my God," he groaned. Tears of humiliation and helpless fury flooded his eyes. "I ain't even got the guts to bump myself off." He raised his head, hopelessly. The night wind blew drearily, and faint on its whisper came the far-off blare of a tiny talking machine. The noise conjured up a mental picture of the elite saloon, that dive of iniquity where men talked loud, drank hard, and died suddenly. Out of the depths of self-abasement and alcohol, an idea, fantastic and paradoxical, was born. Joey Donory turned cold at the mere conception of that idea, but he was past the borderline of desperation. "They say demon darts hit town today," he whispered to himself, cold sweat beading his brow. The merriment in the elite was in full swing. Men reeled, shouted, and swung the shrill-voiced ladies of the resort, but man or woman, drunk or sober, they were all careful to leave clear a generous space near the end of the bar. In the center of this forbidden spot, throned in somber regality and crowned with a brooding and sinister aloofness, stood Demon Darts in all his glory. Your true killer is ever the actor, the perfect showman. This particular gunman was almost a legend in the Copper Basin country, though he had never before honored the locality with his presence. For that matter, He was almost traditional all over the West. Lurid and terrible were the tales of his deeds, and no one, looking at the great dark bulk of him, and at the sinister lined face with the narrow, cold, merciless eyes glittering beneath the heavy brow, could doubt that there was a large measure of truth in most of those tales. All the local bad hombres were silent and subdued, even, nay, and especially, Bull Groker, the burly miner who ruled supreme over the Copper Basin fighting men, and it seemed fit to make an early and unobtrusive exit. He breathed a frank sigh as the saloon door swung shut behind him, guided by his careful hand, and at that moment a smaller figure heaved up suddenly in the gloom, and set of thin, steely fingers clutched his arm with a nervous grip. "Donory," said Groker with disapproval. "Ain't I tell you early in the evening not to come fooling around where there are men? Is Demon Darts in there?" hissed Joey, unheeding. The unexpectedness of the question almost rendered Groker speechless, and he could only find words as follows. Yeah, but well, what do you want?" Joey had already pushed past him, and Groker burned up with curiosity to know what the most arrant coward in the country wanted with the most notorious killer followed him. Joey had not been in the Copper Basin many months, but even so, he had endured enough at the hands of Bull to assure that worthy of the smaller man's lack of courage. Now he noted that Joey was white-faced and was shaking as if in the grip of a chill. In an element rude and elemental where human passions are frank and blatant, shocks and surprises many be expected. Jars unexpected and sudden come to the hardened sinners who frequented the elite, but it is safe to say that never were they so jolted out of their cynic callousness than that night. The unexpected frightens, and it was with the sudden icy chill of real horror that the drinkers, dancers, and gamblers heard the sudden voice bleat, "Demon Darts, he's the shrinking violet I'm looking for." Dancing, drinking, gambling stopped as if the participants had all been struck dead. A cocktail shaker slipped from a nervous hand and crashed to the floor like the crack of doom. There in the doorway, with his arms still wide spread, holding apart the swinging doors, and with his mouth still gaping from yelling the frightful words, stood Joey Donory. Joey Donory had yelled at Demon Darts. Strong men held their breaths and waited for the skies to fall. The watchers blanched, fearful lest the insulted gunman include all present in the sweeping doom which might inevitably mow down the lunatic in the doorway. As for Darts, he had jerked about at the sound of the voice, his hand shooting to the big black gun at his hip, but he had not drawn, and now he stood eyeing the intruder somberly. To the horrified watchers, that stare was an assurance of sudden death in its most grisly form. But a close observer would have noted not a little amazement and bewilderment in the killer's icy eyes. Not in years had any man addressed Demon Darts thus. The not inconsiderable few who had called with the intentions of giving him a one-way ticket to the next world had been either wary and subtle or blazing and passionate, but one and all had been accorded to him the respect due him. Yet here this shrimp, that made it more sinister. Darts did not know Joey. Had the maniac been a giant, it would have been easier to understand, for notwithstanding the time-honored adage that Colonel Colt made all men equal, few people really believed it, and still are prone to think that a blazing gun is more effective in the hand of a big, powerful man than in the hand of, say, one of Joey's proportions. Now Donory strode forward, and the people gave back as if he were a leper. He saw all eyes turn from him to the man who stood alone at the bar. With a sinking feeling, he knew it was the killer. The sight chilled him to the marrow, but he was wild with drink, with desperation engendered by a lifetime of humiliation, and to a lesser extent by the dramatics of the moment. Even in this deadly hour, he was aware of the intense stares, and they went to his head. Joey Donory had craved to be the center of attention. Now he was at it with a vengeance, and he had burned all of his bridges. He would make the most of the moment. He walked up to the silent and somber Darts and eyed him insolently. "Demon Darts?" he sneered, unable to keep his voice from shaking a little, for cold sweat was beading from his brow. A hell of a gunman you are, you lousy tramp. A sudden, really painful gurgling gasp escaped the onlookers. Joey instinctively shut his eyes and waited the end. In a couple of seconds he realized he was still alive, and his eyes jerked open, wide. Darts had not even drawn. He was eyeing the smaller man with a strange expression growing in his eyes. Darts moved quickly, but he did not think quickly. However, an idea was fermenting in his skull. He spoke for the first time. "You tired of living, fella? Don't you know I'm just as liable to plug you as look at you?" The audience shivered in an ecstasy of anticipatory fright. Joey was getting shaky. It was not courage, but a sort of insanity that was keeping him up, and his knees began to rattle. He wanted to get this over with before he lost all of his nerve and broke down. Of course, suicide was his object. Badgering Darts to make the gunman kill him. A quick ending. "They don't have time to suffer when they stop my lad," the killer had boasted. A way out without using his own hand. Courage for which he lacked. Moreover, the empty honor of leaving a certain glamour about his taking off as the man who had baited the terrible demon Darts. And now Darts seemed inclined to prolong the agony, and Joey went wild. Maybe the demon thought so little of him that he would not even waste powder on him. "Go on," he shouted. "Shoot me, why don't you?" He tore open his shirt and crowded forward almost against the staring gunman. His voice broke in a great sob which sounded like fury to the crowd. "You always brag your victims don't kick after you pull the trigger. Go on if you got the guts of a louse." "Listen here," said Darts in a strange, strangled voice. "You got no call to be picking a fight with me. I ain't never seen you before." The feeling was growing. This fellow was some terrible gunfighter, so terrible that even Demon Darts was no match for him. Else, how would he dare the demon? He must know he had a cinch. So those faced Darts empty-handed and goad him to wrath. What was the cinch? Gunman planted in the crowd, TNT under the floor, Derringers up his sleeves, and inhuman skill at using them. Cold sweat began to appear on the brow of Demon Darts. He was far from being a coward, but this was ghastly. This fellow knew he had him, Darts, in a triple cinch somehow. There's nothing so numbing as the experience of a man who for years been used to frighten respect, and suddenly confronted with someone who not only seemed to hold no fear of him, but to actually be contemptuous of him. The higher a man values his own prowess, the higher he is likely to value the untested prowess of a scornful foe. Most gunmen are high-strung, human panthers. A panther is a terrible fighter, but the flutter of a girl's handkerchief will sometimes stampede him. Demon Darts began to shake like a leaf. His hand fell limply from his belt. "Don't you go picking no fight with me," he said thickly, and with some difficulty. "I got no quarrel with you. Let's have a drink and forget it." Joey scarcely knew what the man was saying. All he knew was that the nightmare was being prolonged. He went temporarily crazy. "You ain't nothing but a big false alarm," he screamed, seeking wildly for insults which would sting this man out of what Joey thought to be contemptuous indifference. "You big tramp, I ain't even got a pocket knife and you got 2 guns. You yella. You lousy yellow low-down thieving coyote that ain't got the guts to drill a man only in the back." He stopped for a breath, perceiving as though through fog that Demon Darts blew about the lips and, ghastly as the eye, said nothing. Entirely distraught, Joey slapped his face with resounding force. At that, Darts ducked wildly and gave a strangled cry. "You ain't gonna force me into no one-sided slaughter fight, you cold-blooded murderer," he screamed. "If you kill me, you gotta do it. Now!" And reeling like a man blind drunk, he crowded past Joey and ran blunderingly to the doors, plunging through them into the night, to be seen no more in the Copper Basin country. Silence lay like a black pall over the elite saloon. Joey, dazed, entirely incapable of coherent thought, moved mechanically and without conscious volition toward the door. He could not yet realize what had happened. Men and women cowered back from him, horror mirrored in their eyes. At the side of the door stood Bull Groker, and this worthy croaked hoarsely like a frog as Joey neared him. The dreary portent of the noise drew Joey's lackluster gaze, and Groker made infantile and futile motions with his feet as though he'd flee, but could not. Then, with a heroic effort, he said, after several gagging false starts, Mr. Donory, be you doing to drill me? Me? Said Joey in a mechanical but ghastly whisper. Nah, I come here to see Demon Darts. It's him I wants. He's in California by this time, said Groker with a vast whimpering sigh of prayerful relief. Mr. Donory, I want to thank you for not having killed me. I know I've been kind of offensive at times, but you knowed it was just my friendly, hearty way. I'll take care not to do it no more. Will you not be sore at me, Mr. Donory? No, whispered Joey, still in a daze. Let me shake your hand, please, sir, Mr. Donory, gulped Groker, almost weeping with relief. He shook Joey's limp hand with awe, but his instincts were all for kissing it. Then he moved away to the bar, and looking back over his shoulder and walking with stiff, automaton-like steps. The other men in the place stood, staring spellbound, as yet they were incapable of thought. As Joey opened the doors to depart, someone touched him respectfully on the shoulder. He turned to meet the admiring gaze of one of the wealthiest mine owners in the Copper Basin country. Mr. Donory, I've been wanting to meet a man like you for a long time, a man all fire and steel, but with perfect control of himself. You're just the man to handle some big deals I'm planning. I've had a lot of trouble with the men lately, but under you, they'll be lambs. You'll pardon me if I say this was a big surprise. I should have known, though, that you'd have too much self-control, that you're too big to fool with some small cowlers like Bull Groker and the like. Like all real gunmen, you were just waiting for a fellow who was more on your level, weren't you? Yep, gurgled Donory, staring wildly. Sure you were. And Mr. Donory, last in a low, confidential voice, don't think I'm intruding, but why do you have it in for darts? I don't, began Joey, finding partially coherent speech. The true old type of Western gunfighter, said the mining magnate admiringly. You folks don't have to have a grudge. It's just to see who's the best man. He slapped Joey rather timidly on the shoulder, evidently much awed at the new risen celebrity. You come around. No, I'll come around to your shack tomorrow and we'll talk business. Yeah, gargled Joey. Good night. Good night, Mr. Donory, came the respectful chorus from the entire crowd. Donory drifted out into the darkness, walking like a man in a trance. Strange nuts, these real gunfighters, said the magnate to the wan and pallid crowd. Cold as ice. Yet he was a flaming firebrand when he was calling darts. Give me a drink, said a cowboy suddenly. By Judas, I can hardly believe it yet. Say, fellers, this here's something you tell your grandchildren. That you saw Demon Darts take water and back down, take a cussin' and a rap in a pan and run like a jackrabbit. Believe me, it's Mr. Donory from now on with me. Who you reckon he is, anyhow? Lord knows. Tex Slade, maybe. Got a string of killings 9 mile long, I bet. Anyway, Dark sure knowed him. Yeah, he plumb turned blue when Donory come in. And who'd have thought it, him being so mild-like? Them mild ones, the real bad ones. Thus the saloon buzzed with semi-hysterical conversation. Back at his shack, the situation was beginning to dawn on Joey. By golly, yammered the hero wildly. I plumb bluffed the liver out of Darts, not intended to, and he took it on the lamb. Joey was shaking. Must have been clean out of my head. Thank the Lord I'm still alive. And now, by golly, I got a reputation that I'll never have to defend and which nobody will question because Darts is such a bloody devil. I went out to get exterminated. A slow grin overspread his homely countenance, which of late had known few grins. By golly, they were killing cause right there. Yellow Donory was exterminated, and in his place now is Mr. Donory, which I care if I ain't really brave. Long as people remember tonight, no man will dare start anything with me. And here am I, Mr. Donory, with a man's job I can keep at last, and a man's rightful respect.